लैक हो रहा है।
Is there anybody from Baxter too?
I have no idea. There should be.
Hi, good evening, sir. Kishore this side.
Kishore is there. Kishore is there.
Good evening to all the panelists. Thank you, sir.
We're just starting in a minute. Should we start?
Yep.
Everyone is okay? Dr. Jitendra, can you hear me?
Sure, boss. Please.
Nitin Achand, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nitin is there?
Nitin
Yes,
is there.
yes,
Nitin?
Yeah, Nitin is there.
Nitin is there.
Okay.
Good evening and very warm welcome on behalf of the ACE Academy of Clinical Education. In these times of COVID and these times of webinars, we are actually here to discuss a very important topic. When we talk of COVID, we largely limit ourselves to ventilation and respiratory issues. And as time passes, people are learning, people are talking, people are discussing, and people are realizing the value of the involvement of other organs and their ultimate results. So we're going to discuss about renal dysfunction in a patient who suffers from COVID-19 and how do you manage it? Not just managing that individual, but how do you manage the system? Now, before I delve deeper, two small things I would like to point out. No one can call himself an expert on COVID. This is a very new disease. All of us are learning about it. And there is no absolute black or white. In the morning, there is something else. In the evening, there's something else on the same topic. This is a very, very fast evolving field. So there might be some discrepancies in the information. Now, let me start by introducing my esteemed faculty. I'm fortunate enough to have Dr. Jitendra Goswami. He is a renowned nephrologist and head of the department nephrology at Manipal Hospital, Jaipur. Dr. Sambit Sahu is head critical care at KIMS Hospital, Hyderabad. Dr. Nitin Jain is heading critical care at Paras Hospital, Delhi. And Dr. Achin Narang is heading critical care at Alchemist Hospital, Panchkula. I'm Dr. Pankaj Anand. I am working with SCG Hospital, Jaipur. Now, just to make this entire discussion more interesting, I'll start with this very small case history. This was a 77-year-old gentleman, a known case of diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, but with no history or evidence of any significant baseline renal dysfunction, who came to us in the ER with classical history of high-grade fever, with dry cough and shortness of breath, obviously making it a very suspect case as far as COVID was concerned. So he was naturally admitted in the isolation ward, where he was tachycardic, tachypneic, was drowsy but was arousable and was producing urine. His ABG showed a PaO2 of 56 and a PaO2 of 48. We started him on IV fluids, 100% oxygen on a non-rebreathing mask. We couldn't find enough veins, so we had to put in a central venous catheter under due cautions, and we gave him some shots of antibiotics. His first test results showed a total leukocyte count of 6,500. He was lymphopenic. There was an increase in his SGOT, SGPT levels as well as LDH. His blood urea nitrogen was 32 and creatinine was 1.4. Urine examination showed proteinuria with some amount of hematuria. His 2D echo had an ejection fraction of 48%. An RT-PCR nasopharyngeal swab came out positive for COVID-19. So he was accordingly shifted to the ICU. Now in the ICU on day 3, his oxygenation started worsening. He had to be intubated and ventilated, obviously with due cautions. His blood pressure started going down and his urine output also started going down. We got an HRCT chest which showed bilateral ground glass opacities. So largely a classical case of coronavirus related, I would say, critical lung involvement along with some amount of kidney involvement. Now my first question here is with Dr. Sambit. Dr. Sambit, can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Now, how common is acute kidney injury in ARDS patients? And I'm not just talking about COVID patients, but in general, ARDS all cause, how common is it?
Yeah. So we go back to all the studies of ARDS that have been done. And even the incidence of AKI for ARDS, as the definition of ARDS has been changing and maturing over time, the incidence of AKI also has been changing because the definition of AKI have been improving over time. So, and they also differ as per what criteria of AKI do you follow. But if you consider KDIGO criteria or rifle criteria, which are mostly followed now, in patients with ARDS, on average around 35 to 45% of patients have AKI. Now, they are AKI, and among that, the cohort of patients having AKI, what is again more important is to understand what severity of AKI is. Because that you have a stage 1 AKI, which is potentially very, very reversible. And you also have the moderate to severe AKI, where they might land up in end organ damage. So among the 40% again, generally around, if you have a moderate to severe AKI, you have, 60% of the patients land up in moderate to severe, and the rest, 15-20 odd, they land up in stage 1 AKI. This is in ARDS per se without COVID.
Okay. Now I was just asking about ARDS, and I'll come to COVID later. So this is a study by Derman et al. In the American Society of Nephrology Journal, where they clearly suggested in 2014 that almost 44% of patients with ARDS had AKI, as compared to 27% in the non-ARDS patients. And this is a more recent study in critical care medicine in 2019 called the Lung Safe study, where they have reported an incidence of around 40% AKI in patients with ARDS. Now the mechanism, if you see, there are multiple mechanisms for a person's kidney to get injured if he has ARDS. This could be per se because of the disease process itself, or it could be because of the ventilation, because of the hypotension associated with it. I'll not get into the details, but I'll come to the next question again with Dr. Sambit. Now, talking specifically of COVID-19, how common is AKI? Because that is very important to discuss here. That is the entire reason we are talking about.
Yeah. So the understanding of AKI in COVID, it has been, from in both the spectrums. If you go by the Chinese study, what they came out initially, they made a headline saying that there is no AKI in COVID. But as people started having more and more understanding of the pathophysiology of COVID, at present, in the European countries and in US, the studies, though they are small studies, maybe around 50 to 100 patients at the most, they are coming up with much more prevalence and incidence of AKI. So, even in this Chinese study, later on, they had an addition to the study where they claimed around 6% of patients had AKI. But the recent European and the US studies, where they treat only COVID patients, these COVID hospitals, there it ranges from up to around 85% of patients. From 25 to 85% of patients might land up having AKI of some severity.
Okay, so as you rightly said, the first study came out of Wuhan said that there is no kidney involvement. But as time passes, we are learning that AKI is quite a common finding. There are studies where it ranges from 0.6 to almost 29%, which is if you take out the average is around around 6.2%. But if you actually look at the real world unpublished data, and this has been reported by Sir Eric Hostel, where he suggests, as you rightly said, the AKIs almost might go up till 85%, and almost 37% of the patients actually needing RRT. So this is quite important. Now, moving on with.
I would like to.
Yeah, you would like to add something, Jiten? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I spoke to a lot of people like from Ahmedabad and from Hyderabad and Maharashtra, few of my friends, and they have a decent number of COVID patients. Surprisingly, in India, COVID having a very little AKI or quite less number of AKI. Even the severity is not that great. So, yet data is not published from anywhere in India, but I think AKI incidences are quite low in Indian COVID.
Okay, that's really reassuring. I mean, because they.
Now, can I have my personal experience here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have around 20 patients till now. Sorry, 17 patients till now. And I would agree with Dr. Goswami when he says that if you know, a person without a pre-existing kidney disease, without any pre-existing kidney disease, and if the COVID is of mild to moderate severity, they generally do not land up in AKI. But on the flip side, also we have seen that there has been, I mean, for some reason, patients with chronic kidney disease, maybe because of the dialysis setup they are moving around, we haven't. They are more likely to contract a COVID, maybe because of the dialysis centers they move around. And the mortality there is extremely high.
We also have to remember that usually the kidneys get involved slightly later in the second week. By the time the so-called cytokine storm comes in. So probably as we evolve, unfortunately, there are chances that we might see more of kidney involvement in these patients as we get more sick patients in our ICU. But yeah, this is a consensus in India. If you see by hearsay, the incidence is slightly less. So moving on to the next question, Dr. Achint, are you there? Dr. Narang?
Yes, sir.
So what this is more of a pathology question. I'm asking an intensivist, but what are the possible idiopathogenesis of renal injury in AKI COVID patients?
Okay. See, because COVID is notorious for acting on ACE2 receptors. So, angiotensin 2 activation and complement activation, it may lead to hypercoagulability and microangiopathy. Plus, lymphopenia can cause cytokine storm by myeloid cell activation. Moreover, like with other viruses, it has direct harmful damage to tubular damage, thus leading to tubular necrosis. Or this may also be part of multi-organ dysfunction, which with any other MODs because of infective etiology can be. So it's a mixed pathophysiology, various pathways act, which ultimately leads to hypoxia. then there is organ-organ interaction, inter-organ
बताओ तुमको
interaction.
कैसे करते हैं
Pardon?
ये देखना
I think there is some disturbance.
So basically it is
अरे वो तो जब आता है तभी दिखता है ना
I think somebody's.
it is an injury which is mediated by the cytokines maybe, or due to the direct damage, I would say, which does lead to renal dysfunction. Also associated acute cardiac and lung injury may contribute by as a part of multi-organ.
Right. So I would just like to add that we have to remember that the basic pathophysiology is that the S protein present on the virion actually binds to this TMPRS S2 and ACE2 receptors. And these receptors, besides being present in the lungs and the upper airways, are also present in the cardiac myocytes, are also present in the tubular epithelium and podocytes. And wherever they bind, they actually damage that. Especially if you're talking about kidney, as Dr. Achin said, it could be an ATN or interstitial inflammation, podocytopathy, microangiopathy, or collapsing glomerulopathy. The mechanisms might be variable. So it's a complex process where there is a virus-mediated injury, cytokine storm, angiotensin 2 pathway activation, dysregulation of the complement, hypercoagulation, microangiopathy, and organ crosstalk, all of which ultimately lead to the disease process. Now, Dr. Nitin, coming to you, what are the markers what are those markers that you use to assess the volume status of patient who's in COVID-19? Especially keeping, Dr. Nitin, can you hear me? Just a minute. I would request the delegates to please mute their microphones.
आखिर तक सब जितने भी हैं और आप ऑडियो को छुपाना चाहते हो वीडियो को छुपाना चाहते हो
चलो डॉक्टर नितिन
please
speaking and I'm finding it difficult to find that person out, so just continue.
Kishore, are you there, Kishore?
No, I am the admin. I am trying to mute people.
Achha.
Just continue with the answer. I'll try to track that.
Okay.
ऐसे ही जैसे मेरे को वापस वोट चाहिए तो ये पंकज आनंद इसका वोटर है ना इसको ऐसे करूंगा ना तो वो ऑप्शंस वापस आ जाएंगे
So Nitin, Dr. Nitin, please continue.
Yes, okay. So now, what markers do we use to assess the volume status? We use the same markers as we use for other patients while managing a hemodynamically unstable patient. Ultrasound, I would say, too difficult to operate in these kind of patients. So we would prefer with invasive hemodynamic monitoring if the patient is hemodynamically unstable, which includes PICO and EV1000.
So you routinely would suggest that?
Not routinely, only in very selected, very sick patients who are, I would say,
supposing, for example, our patient who is hypertensive now is on ventilator, is on inotrope. Just give me the basic list starting from the very basics. How do you monitor? Because not all of us are having these advanced equipment that you're talking about.
Yes, so we start with the clinical markers first. Urine output,
हेलो
heart
कौन
rate.
बोलता है ऐका मी डॉक्टर तांबडे बोलते ते जे शिरापुरी पेशंट होतात ना शिरपुरी का शिरा त्यांना फ्लूइड दिलं का तुम्ही
Pankaj, can you ask whoever?
No, I'm trying to, but I'm not able to identify.
Kishore, are you there? Kishore?
Sir.
कारण मग ते सर्जरी नाही करायची का
Everyone is muted.
सभी को म्यूट कर दो पंकज बहुत हो सकता है इसमें
No, everyone is muted. But this person has
हां कारण त्याला बरेच प्रॉब्लेम आहेत सजेशन फंक्शन कमी आहे एक्टोपिक्स आहे चेस्ट पण बॅड वाटतं पेशंट एकदम रेस्टलेस आहे
not able to identify this. Everyone is muted.
तर मी धीरजला कम्युनिकेट केलं होतं
lot of people are not.
मला म्हणाले की पेशंट डिस्चार्ज मागतो म्हणून
There is somebody with DENI who is speaking. Vizag.
Just give me a minute. I'm trying to identify that person. Dennis John is
नातेवाईक पण म्हणत होते बाबा
Yes, Dennis Jones maybe. From Vizag.
muted.
Oh, I can hear there.
वरती काय
Requesting everyone to please mute yourself before you. Chalo,
Okay. So we start with the clinical parameters first. Urine output, skin turgor, and we try to assess. Then we see the heart rate, blood pressures to try to assess the volume status, like we do for all other patients.
Right.
Ultrasound has proven to be a good modality. If we have ultrasounds, we would like to see the IVC diameters, do a lung ultrasound, look for B lines, even an echo, screening echo to help us assess the volume status. Fluid management is as for other ARDS patients, but we are not too restrictive, neither too liberal. Usually for ARDS patients, we say restrictive in fluids therapy. We follow the same guidelines here also, but what the latest studies are suggesting now, that besides ARDS, COVID is more of occlusion of pulmonary circulation. So people say anticoagulation has got a big role. So I think the strategy should be directed towards both, that we are not too liberal on the fluids. We give a balanced fluid to maintain a urine output, and we try to look for the volume status.
Anyone else would like to comment, Dr. Sambit?
So we have been dealing with a few COVID and a few very suspect patients. So here we are digressing a little bit from the established protocol of treatment of assessing fluid responsiveness, and that is basically with respect to the inhibition or to the inhibition of the healthcare. The doctors, the intensivists, to be at the bedside for long periods of time, and so instead of doing an ultrasound, which we generally practice in all our ICU, where we use ultrasound very liberally to assess the fluid responsiveness, here we are more comfortable having an ART line in place for hemodynamic assessment, and that also helps the sisters to draw samples very quickly and easily. And we also rely on the CVP, though and the dynamic indices. If the patient is intubated and ventilated, and he is sedated, well sedated, in those circumstances, we try and do all the dynamic indices of assessing fluid responsiveness. Either it is tidal volume challenges, or we use, as he said, using EB 1000. We have not used PICO as of now, but definitely FlowTrax and EB 1000. We are more prompt in using them. Ultrasound is very, what you can say, what the problem that the problem with ultrasound that we are finding is, because it is a team consisting of doctors of different seniority going into the COVID wards and working around the clock for 7 days. Not everyone has the same expertise, and it becomes very subjective then. So relying on the interpretation of the interpretation of the junior most, who is not very well versed, has backfired for us. So we want to have more objective measures of assessing fluid responsiveness.
Now, with you only. Now, would you actually attribute some incidence of AKI with therapy also? We all know that there is no definitive therapy as far as COVID goes, but then we have many experimental, I will use the term experimental, right from SCQS to remdesivir, and even the ventilatory management, the fluid management. You think all this could be also attributing to the renal insult in these patients?
Is it to me?
Yeah,
definitely, because till now we have not found out the adjusted risk of what AKI per se. What component of the AKI is because of COVID only. What we are having is all the precipitating factors that add up and cause AKI in a patient, and which might range from fluid management, ventilatory management, drugs, pre-existing diseases, etc. So among the drugs, we try and of course, we try and avoid NSAIDs in all the patients, but with respect to drugs that we are giving, for example, we are giving hydroxychloroquine for moderate patients also, but we do not have any experience in giving remdesivir or any other drugs, but they have been found to cause, or they should be restricted in patients with proven AKI and also with proven acute liver injury. I mean, with coexisting liver injury among the drugs.
Thank you. Moving further, if I were to use the word, and I'm going to answer this, what could be the principles of management of kidney failure in these patients? You know, we all know that there is no targeted treatment of anything in SARS-2. We are largely all giving supportive therapy. So this is the only thing is usually the need for dialysis usually arises during the second week and affects almost 5% of ICU patients. Now, I think I'll direct this question to Dr. Jitendra Goswami. Goswami, whether kidney replacement therapy or RRT should be approached differently in acute care setting, particularly with COVID patients? Dr. Jitendra, are you there?
Unmute. You have to unmute.
As we have seen in the pathophysiology that COVID is related with some kind of cytokine storm. So theoretically, I can say a convective therapy must be superior to your routine diffusion therapy. Like what is like convective therapy? Your CVP, HDF, or CRRT. So I think that is the additional advantage. But as of now, there is no robust evidence. What is the CRRT versus CRRT? So as we always talk about the Pankaj, that both these therapies are not competitive; they are complementary to each other. So if you have CRRT in place, I think it is wise to use. Especially, I think the patient who are having ARDS, instability. I think rest of the patient we can use routine SLAD and HD.
Now, if I were to talk, sorry.
One more I want to add. I think you have heard about the hypercoagulable state and microangiopathy related to this virus. So there is a lot of case reports and problem are coming from the Western world that most of the filters are getting clotted if you keep your blood flow low. So this is the actual real problem.
So I have a question on that. I'll come back to you on this. So what are the precautions needed to prevent? Obviously, you have to manage the patient, all the parameters. You have to have a high degree of caution in monitoring these patients, and consider if the patient is worsening fast, consider or prepare for an RRT early. Now, again, Dr. Jitendra, I'm coming to you. What contingency planning and resource management? So we are not here talking about how you're managing one particular patient. There is a chance, and people are facing a lot of surge coming in. We have limited resources everywhere, and even in renal replacement therapy, we have limited number of machines, limited number of personnel. So how will you plan the contingency, and what would be your resource management if we consider this is a pandemic with respect to renal dysfunction?
So, boss, as we all know that we live in a country with a limited resource. So I would suggest if, like we have already SD machine in most of the hospitals which are running ICU, it is not easy to buy new machines. So it is wise that if we cut down the routine CKD patient dialysis time, we can spare machines for our COVID patients or sick patients. This is the one where our routine dialysis schedule is 4 hours thrice per week. So what we can do, we can reduce the dialysis hours for 2.5 to 3 hours with some kind of low K bath. So it will spare our dialysis machine. And second part is this, like earlier, even in Western world, people were using CVSDS for 24 hours, 48 hours. When they found the surge came in, what they did exactly, they convert this as CRRT to PIRRT, they prolong intermittent renal replacement therapy, and they cut down their CRRT time from 24 hours to 6 to 12 hours. So they use the single machine in 2 to 3 patients in a day. So how I think this is the way we can use our existing resources, because it's not easy to buy new dialysis machine. It's not easy to buy new CRRT machine. If you really want to reduce your time from CRRT to PIRRT, what they did exactly, flow rate. The people who are doing CRRT must be aware of this effluent rate. They just double the effluent rate and they kept their blood flow from 200 to like 300 to 350. So I think this is a one way where we can deal with this. The single CRRT machine, we can use 2 to 3 patients in a day. And second part is this, the typical indication of dialysis in COVID are like metabolic acidosis, hyperkalemia, and volume overload. So if you find that patient is non-allouric, so and hyperkalemia is the only way to deal with it. So unfortunately, we are not having this, novel potassium binder like sodium, zirconium, and petromer. But if patient is not having ileus or some kind of GI difficulties, we can use K-bind in India. Like my typically use 15 gram 2 to 3 times a day. In that way, we can avoid dialysis in hyperkalemic patients. And another way is if the volume overload is the only problem, then we should give the try of this diuretics. And so far, this is the most important part, manpower. It is not easy to deal with the search without adequate manpower. So I suggest two parts: the telemonitoring and e-consults. Telemonitoring, like what if your nurse start the dialysis, they should be a facility that she can monitor 3 to 4 patients in a row or some safe place. And minimum, I think, intervention should be required from that unless it is not required. And second part, the nephrologist and intensivist have to work together. And I think unless the volume assessment is not required and some kind of serious assessment not required, the e-consult should be nephrology should be from the nephrology team. And as we all know, this some kind of precautions. And another way is like, if we are really exhausting with this RRT, it's HD and CRRT, I think PD is the one of the important part to start. I think these are the way we can deal with this search.
Right. Now, coming to the next question, are there any specific measures, Dr. Achint, you would suggest in managing patients with AKI and ESRD?
No specific measures. It depends on the volumes you have. Right now, we are not looking at pouring in every day with COVID. Like I only have one patient who is requiring dialysis, a COVID patient. So we can afford a separate area for him. But yes, once the numbers increase, we definitely will have to bundle them together and manage in specific unit, and avoiding daily patient contact with the different teams. As Dr. Goswami already mentioned, e-consults can be useful here with the nephrologist, and that's what we are practicing also. And so institution to institution, everything may vary. And as for the indications, they will remain similar to any other patient with acute kidney injury. So whether to go ahead with ISD or CRRT, this can be discussed with the nephrologist, and a suitable plan can be charted out for the patient.
Right. Now, Dr. Goswami, you were talking about how to handle the frequent, because we all now know that this is a hypercoagulable state and there is a tendency for the circuit to get clogged again and again. So how do you handle such situations? How do you plan to handle such situations?
Also, again, I think it's nothing new, but because we will use the same plan that we are using in most of the ICU care. Unless heparin is not contraindicated, use heparin, because this is the common myth in ICU that people tend to avoid heparin while dialysis. I think sometimes your DVT prophylaxis also. So I would suggest until your platelet count is not going down less than 50,000, you use heparin each and every dialysis, because citrate facility is not available. It's not easy to monitor. Even in routine dialysis, you can use citrate. Yeah, regarding CRRT, it is a wonderful option with the Baxter. We can use the citrate thing, but citrate needs again a lot of calculations and time to time prescription changes that can handle with the e-consult. So I would suggest there is no other plan. And if it happens, then we use HIT protocol.
Okay. So Dr. Sambit, you are using are you using heparins in all of your patients? I'm not talking specifically of AKI, because Dr. Goswami said that this problem can be solved because of heparin, but you have patients on ventilators and you have, so what is your protocol for anticoagulation of these patients, AKI or not?
Yeah, for non-AKI patients, we give low molecular weight heparin.
To every patient?
Yeah, for every patient. For every patient who's in ICU, which means he's mild to moderately sick. Not mild, but moderately sick. In these patients, definitely we give low molecular weight heparin. And it is more than the prophylaxis dose. I mean, if the risk of bleeding, so we try and assess the risk of bleeding. And if the risk of bleeding is minimal, we go for a therapeutic dose of heparin or low molecular weight heparin. And if the risk of bleeding is moderate, we go for an intermediate dose. If the risk of bleeding is high, we generally try and avoid.
So how do you determine, you're talking about risk of bleeding? So
yeah, risk of bleeding is we have the score. I'll just.
Hello.
Yeah, we have the score which measures, which has thrombocytopenia into its calculation, which has.
Are you talking about the Welch score?
What score?
The Welch score that we use for
No. It's just.
Okay,
I'll come back to the name of the score later on. But what it has is, if the patient's thrombocytopenia, we have the INR calculation into it. We have any earlier history of coagulopathy into it, and there are two more things. So.
Dr. Pankaj, can you mute everybody and then?
That's what I have muted everybody, but somebody are missing. I think now it's been taken care of. Now, Dr. Goswami, we are anticipating an increased number of patients, and as the number of patients goes up, we are anticipating more patients with AKI. And as you said, we might have a situation where we might have limited resources as far as hemodialysis or CRRT is concerned. So is there any role, first of all, of acute peritoneal dialysis or a patient who's already on peritoneal dialysis? How do we handle this situation? And in an acute situation, can we think about peritoneal dialysis?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is one of the dying art, actually. As soon as this hemodialysis is getting popular, this acute PD is almost, I think, disappearing from the ICUs. But as I said, when you are limited, will exhaust it. And I think PD is one of the things we can rely on. So I think role of acute PD is definitely there. But for that, first of all, we have to have a catheter access for the acute PD. It's not that easy. And either we can use the manual exchanges or the cycler. The typical prescription of the acute PD is like almost 2 liters of volume of the specific PD fluid and 5 to 6 cycle in 10 to 12 hours we usually keep. And I think individualization is very important because the people who are not trained for the PD, I think most of the even I would say very few nephrologists in India, I think they are trained with the PD. So individualization of prescription is very, very important. Another part is the challenges with the acute PD is, as we are saying, the patient is in this case, the patient going in the ARDS, you might require some kind of proning. In that case, PD is not useful. So severe respiratory failure. This adynamic EVS is there. Even if you secure the access, you put the fluid inside the abdomen, it will not come out. And another hyperkalemia, life-threatening, severe volume overload. All this situation only can be dealt with the hemodialysis. The another challenging part of acute PD is securing the PD access. You can see the two kind of catheter I am showing here. One is the rigid catheter and another is the tank of soft catheter. Putting rigid catheter is an easy option, but it can cause hemoperitoneum kind of injury if patient, coagulative profile is not good. And second catheter is the soft tank of catheter. It requires some kind of expertise. It is not easy to put. So either you need a surgeon or your nephrologist should be expert, or you need an intervention radiologist for that. Another challenge with the exchanges of the PD, because I am saying it's a dying art. Most of the hospital, even the nephrologists, nurses, they are not, aware of the PD processes. So you have to have PD coordinators, PD nurse, and expert nephrologists for the exchange, and you have to train your ICU staff also, because it is not the thing that we have to be there for 24/7. At some point of time, I think ICU staff has to do it. So we have to train ICU staff also. So either you are doing the manual exchanges, or either you are doing the cycle exchange, you need some kind of training. And another part is the acute PD fluid. This is the typical acute PD fluid, which is very cheap. And I think it's only available here in Rajasthan in SMS hospital. I don't know where another places where you get it or not. Otherwise, you have to use some extra, specific CAPD fluid that is expensive and not easy to use. So I think these are the challenges with the acute PD. But I think we should consider this option for the resource where the resources are really exhausting. PD will play a major role there.
Right.
Yeah. Dr. Pankaj, can I come in?
Yes, Amit, obviously.
Yeah, so it just skipped my mind. So just to come back, so the score that you asked me for the score, so it's Hasbled score.
Okay.
So Hasbled score is I know it's not exactly used for this condition, but it's been used for atrial fibrillation when you want to anticoagulate them. But that is what we extrapolate it here also. So it has hypertension. Then you have if you have a renal failure or liver failure, it has INR in it. It has stroke in it, age in it, and drugs in it. So it's Hasbled score. So and if you see the cardiologists, generally they use the Hasbled score to give and titrate their warfarin and anticoagulation. So that is what we generally use.
So a brief slide on what challenges in RT during CRT. We have to understand that the challenges related is obviously the disease process is somewhat different as we are facing in invasive ventilation. Here also the process could involve hyperinflammation and hypercoagulation. We have limited resources, potential need to adapt RRT plans. Our environment is changing. Many a times we'll need to dialyze patient outside the conventional ICUs. We might not have the right type of machines, consumables, or trained staff. So we might have to adapt to, as Dr. Goswami said, to techniques which are not very commonly used, like PD. We might have increased level of stress at bedside. We obviously have challenges like PP, less experienced staff, and the knowledge is changing. So these are typical things which are in COVID pandemic. So Dr. Nathan, coming to you. What is the role of extracorporeal therapy in COVID-19, especially things like Oxiris, etc.?
In cytokine storm conditions, both of these therapies are being used and they have been tried and tested. What I found the information, I think both of them have got an emergency US FDA approval as well for use in COVID. But as of now, their role is uncertain. There is no proven benefit which has been shown. I think larger studies are needed to prove their efficacy. But yes, definitely they have a role when we are dealing with a cytokine storm.
Isn't it with all sorts of therapy in COVID that they are yet to be proven? But so just
what I believe is if US FDA has given approval, maybe emergency approval, maybe there may be some logic to it.
So just a word.
Sambit, you have any opinion on this?
Yeah. So before the government revoked our revoked our thing to treat COVID patients, we were treating, and at that even and a lot of my friends in Hyderabad, they have also been using the Prismaflex with Oxiris, basically to tide over the crisis of cytokine storm, to remove. The basic idea is to try and remove the middle molecules as much as possible, and they have been using Oxiris. They have around 3 patients, I suppose, they have used Oxiris. Not in my place, but in another hospital in Hyderabad.
Yeah, just adding here in ESICM 2016, they actually presented one study where post-cardiac surgery patients, they used it for removal of cytokines. So the cytokine removal is one of the challenges we all are facing and using different approach. But we have to remember that the risk of thrombosis is higher.
Dr. Pankaj, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I think timing is really important. As like you have been we have seen with the CRRT also. CRRT, like when we call CRRT in ICU, when patient on 3 or 4 inotropes, lactates are rocket high, and in that case anyhow survival is not great. What I've seen in this COVID scenario that they use CRRT is pretty earlier. without hypotension, because I think their idea of CRRT, using CRRT, is to use the convective based therapy and to remove the cytokine. I think the same thing we should use with this auxiliary cytosol. The timing should be a little bit earlier. We cannot start auxiliary cytosol patient with ARDS 3 or 4 days in ARDS and finally dying, and one day we just wake up and start the auxiliary cytosol. In that case, I think it's not going to help. I think timing will play a crucial role in any kind of RRT therapy. And like for this auxiliary cytosol, I would say we should start it earlier if you're planning.
Now, another question is, how do you actually disinfect the RRT equipment? Dr. Achint, would you like to comment on this?
I think I'm not the good person to answer this, but most of the disposable ones have to be discarded after treating with hypochlorite on site before taking them out of the rooms. And CRRT filters, of course, they have to be changed every 72 hours or so. And I think only thing we have to be very careful before discarding to treat them, pre-treat them with hypochlorite solution or Virex as per institutional policy.
But that's what we do for every patient, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Dr. Goswami, you do that for every patient, right?
Yeah. So what we are doing right now in our dialysis unit, routine dialysis unit, what we are using single use first of all. Second thing, what we do in between the dialysis, the screen of the dialysis we use with the 60% alcohol, like Bacillol we use, and the rest of the part we use hypochlorite cleaning and railing and everything with the hypochlorite. If you are using BP instrument and pulse oximeter with a dialysis machine, then again you have to use alcohol-based, sterilization. Bacillol you have to use. So I think these are the small things you have to keep in mind in between, because I think the same machine will use on a different patient. Even in ICU, when SARS will come in, then you can miss the sometimes BP instrument, you can miss sometimes the pulse oximeter. So I think these are the important things you have to keep in mind.
Very right. Very right.
Now, coming to the available or recommended RRT options, and I went through the various recommendations, and most people have not talked about it, but the NHS has come up with their clinical guidelines on the 8th April, and they use a term called standard renal replacement therapies as appropriate. So what they want to say and what we all are agreeing is there's no separate therapy available which is specific to COVID. All the form RRT options that are available for other patients are also can be used here depending on the status of the patient, the clinical status of the patient, and the available options. But ideally, as Dr. Goswami also said, CRRT, if we have all the resources, CRRT is a good option. But the reality is our resources are limited and supplied. Initiation ideally should be before the onset of life-threatening complications, as you said, but we need to apply stricter criteria. Prescription of dose compensates for unplanned downtime. We have limited fluids. We might have to use it in non-critical areas, not always in ICUs, and provision according to high standards and benchmarks. Frankly, the standards and benchmarks are changing and are going to change as the thing comes up. So before I sum up, I would want comments from my participants, especially the faculty. Would you like to comment anything, Dr. Sambit, or would you like to highlight?
I have a question for Dr. Goswami, actually. Yeah, so it's just my observation and my concern, rather, is that in India, yeah, of course, we are not finding a lot of AKIs in COVID patients. But the same Indians, if you see in UK, the lot of doctors who succumb to the disease are of Asian origin. So it's not that we are somehow immune. So what do you think would, and all those doctors and healthcare professionals of Asian origin who succumb to the disease in Western countries, they all, I mean, when I speak to my friends out there, all of them have had multi-organ failure, and of course AKI is one of them. What do you think is the difference, or is it something going to happen in India also as time goes by?
I think these two kind of factors which play in such as host factor and pathogen. So I think so pathogen is also playing some role, like some kind of different strain we are having in India, and so far immunity I am totally agree. Even in the transplant, I worked in Canada. We use a different protocol for the Asian and different protocol for the Canadians person. So I totally agree with you. And I have been seeing this trend that Indians are dying more in UK, US, everywhere while treating. So we cannot say 100% that we are immune to this thing. Difficult to comment. I don't know when this thing will increase and surge will come. What will happen to our patients? It's difficult to comment right now.
Dr. Sampit, I'll just like to comment here. I was just reading somewhere, more a sociological thing. But you remember any pandemic, the fringe people, the people who are on the fringes of the society always suffer worse. So if you look at the lot of communities, especially if I might use the word Black and Americans, they're suffering more because they're socio-economically they're down. Probably it has to do with their immunity, their nutrition levels, and that could be one factor. Nobody knows, obviously, like most things in COVID, whether genetics has to do with it or not. But that I think is also an important factor as to what is the basic health status of that particular community.
Possibly.
Anything else you would like to comment? Dr. Achint, you would like to say something?
Though environmental factors have been ruled out, but maybe they have some role to play that COVID has not come out as the epidemic, or yet the peak is to come. We really don't know. But the numbers expected have not reached, maybe due to earlier lockdown or whatever slowdown of the disease. Yes, we really do. Going back to Dr. Sambit's query, maybe Indians are getting succumbed, but we don't know what reason.
Dr. Achint, we've lost your voice.
Am I audible?
Now you're better. Yeah.
So my comment here is, we know the Indians which are dying, but we don't know what percent.
No,
really have
some problem with your voice. Just getting out of AKI. A lot of my friends, and I think it could seem like an optimistic thing to say, but a lot of people are saying that in India, the overall level of sickness, I mean, per 100 patients, positive patients, if you look how many of them land up in ICU or critical, is comparatively less as compared to the West. Would any one of you like to comment on that? This is obviously, we don't have a study. We are just talking about hearsay.
Yeah. So you mean to say the case fatality ratio?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So the case fatality ratio depends also on the case positivity ratio. So in India, what we are seeing in Hyderabad at least is that the case positivity ratio is how many you test and how many turn up positive. Okay, how many you test, how many turn up positive. Now that they say is 4%, I feel it might be still less, because we all say that a lot of people might be infected, and let us assume that 4 times people are more infected. So in that scenario, if the case positivity ratio at present is 4, and if we presume that 4 times more are infected, which means actually the case positivity ratio is 1%, isn't it?
Yeah. No, Sambit, what I was asking was that supposing how many of them actually land up with critical organ failure?
So because we are okay, so your question is only to case fatality ratio, or how many are the chances of how many patients dying is what you're asking.
You can say, or landing up in
landing up in multi-organ failure or chances. So I don't know how many are landing up in multi-organ, but we have data on how many are dying. So if you see the fatality ratios, it has been varying from various states. Every state has an absolute different number. It is varying from 0.1% in some state to 10% in some state. And it might be reflecting the health care preparedness of that state. So I think it is too early to comment on that, because the variance is too high now. You can comment on India if you can comment the whole on the national level, but if you see at the state level, because health is a state subject again, it is varying significantly. Some states with 100, I mean, the simplest thing is, supposingly, let's compare, Telangana has 1,000 cases, we have 30 deaths. And the same way, if you take Rajasthan, which has, or Gujarat, which has 2,000 cases, 700 deaths, 600 or, sorry, how many? Around 200 to 400, 600 deaths, if I'm not wrong. So it is varying from 0.1% to 10%. So it's very difficult as of now.
Dr. Nitin, would you like to comment anything on the entire topic?
Yeah, I think if just moving on with the same question, if we see the worldwide data starting from March till now, what I could observe was the initial days, what we saw was 85% had mild illness, 15% had severe illness. So these kind of patients were there who required, I would say, ICU care. Now, over the period of last 1 or 2 months, this percentage of critical patients have gradually gone down. We say India has got lower mortality of 3%, but I think if we compare to the other parts of the world also, you may attribute it to herd immunity, or you may attribute it to a different kind of strain of virus. But yes, in general, data worldwide is now moving towards almost the same lines, lesser number of critical patients as compared to what initially was at the beginning of pandemic.
Dr. Goswami, would you like to comment?
I would talk about the demography, because I worked in Canada, and people live there with multiple comorbidities. So patient who is on BiPAP, having Melanon with the PICC line, having dialysis, 4 or 5 cancers, 3 or 4 times CABG, they still live. So this kind of population is prevalent in Europe, Canada, and US, and I think these people are what the target of this COVID. And I think if we remove this bias, comorbidity bias from the COVID, then we calculate the fatality rate. Then it will, I think, we can calculate 2 fatality rates. Then we can compare it, because most of the literature you will read that the number of comorbidity increase, the fatality rate, mortality will definitely increase. I think this demography and this old age population is prevalent in UK, US, and Europe. That is one of the reasons we can see the difference.
So our demographic dividend, as Modi ji calls it, could be on our side. We have a younger population with lesser number of comorbidities, and that is probably one positive thing.
Dr. Pankaj, with the old population, multiple comorbidities, they don't survive here. This survival is really great over there. That kind of population will never see here in India.
Right. Thank you. Now I leave the entire forum open for questions. Would anyone from the audience like to ask any questions? Just unmute yourself and please go ahead. Any question on the topic of AKI, or even if you want to discuss something. Any questions? Any clarifications? Just unmute yourself and please go ahead. I don't think anyone is, either we have been very good or we've been. So before I end, one sentence, Dr. Achint. What are you expecting? What are you looking at? What is going to happen? Wild guesses, I know. Next 2 months, 3 months, where are we headed to?
We'll have more number of cases. But yes, as Nitin pointed out, the severity of disease percentage-wise is definitely decreasing. Maybe we are more prepared than other countries were. We started learning a little earlier. Maybe we were expecting a more devastating, disease than it was actually. So, but definitely, number of cases is on the rise. Since we have started testing for pre-op patients, we also have diagnosed, picked up 2 asymptomatic carriers. One was a nephrology patient again with urosepsis for digestion, COVID positive. Management for 2 weeks. So such cases will be rising as the testing facilities increase. Yes, as we diagnose more, we will come across the decreasing percentage of serious advanced.
Dr. Sambit, you would like to comment? One last comment from you
on what's happening, what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, crystal gazing, but
crystal gazing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think from this whole public health problem, it will become a individual health problem. From a pandemic, it will become an endemic. The numbers will rise, but the numbers are going to rise. There is no running away from it. But won't be a public health problem. It'll be like everyone has more access to testing. So maybe going forward, the whole concept of this, suspect patients will come down slowly because you will get the results quicker. So you know what to do. I think that is the only change that's going to happen.
So we'll learn to live with it like you learn to live with other diseases, right?
Yes.
Dr. Nitin, one last sentence from you before I conclude.
See, numbers obviously are definitely going to rise. I think policies are now changing almost very, very frequently. Initially, they used to say hospitalize all patients. Now they say hospitalize only symptomatic patients. Now they say hospitalize only the sicker patients. So they are now keep on revising. They have COVID care centers, hotel isolations, home isolations. So I think it will definitely, the workload on hospitals in future will likely be only for the sicker patients. That is what I believe is going to happen.
One last word, Dr. Jitendra.
Same thing from my side, actually. Yeah, the number definitely will rise, and I think we should plan our resources because we live in a country with limited resource. I think we should make a proper protocol strategy, how to actually play our cards when the time will actually the surge will occur. Hopefully, we will not see that much of sicker patient, but if the time will come, then we have to keep everything in place. Otherwise, you may fall in trouble actually. So I think this protocol strategy and task force is really, really important.
Okay, so there are some learnings from here.
Someone has sent a question. Can you scan? I think Dr. Pankaj.
Yeah. Let me just check. I was just. If the RRT machine once terminated, this is for anyone who wants to answer. If the RRT machine once terminated from COVID-19 case, after how many hours can be used for other patients considering surface viral survival? This is Kedar Tilway. Dr. Jitendra, would you?
Actually, we usually give half an hour gap between two, but that is for the multiple machines. So as soon as you wipe the machines with Bacillone and hypochlorite, and then you can immediately use the machine after 10-15 minutes. There's no problem.
Okay, so what you mean is that after a terminal proper cleaning with the hypochlorite or bacilloid, whatever the recommended disinfectant is, there is no point waiting for a day or 6 hours. You can use it immediately.
People, they usually use heat disinfections. We use Cetrosol for that. It takes 20 to 25 minutes. And that much of time is required. The both things. You give for the hot disinfection, that will happen inside the machine. We usually put a special solution inside the machine, and it automatically runs inside the machine. And secondly, in meanwhile, you pipe the surface, and you can immediately use it. No need to delay. No need for any kind of delay.
I think that answers the question to Dr. Kedar. So I would now conclude the session. I think it was quite a learning for all of us on a topic that not many people are talking about, but that might be of importance not just to our patient, but to all of us. A big word of thank you to all of our faculty who spared their time, and also to the delegates. We'll meet again.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.